Q14. Does Jesus' parable of Lazarus and a rich man in Luke 16:19-31 prove life after death in the form of soul? To answer this question, let's first read and analyze Jesus' parable in Luke 16:19-31. Now there was a certain rich man, and he was clothed in purple and fine linen, living in luxury every day. A certain beggar, named Lazarus, was taken to his gate, full of sores, and desiring to be fed with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Yes, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The beggar died, and he was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his bosom. He cried and said, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame." But Abraham said, "Son, remember that you, in your lifetime, received your good things, and Lazarus in the same way, bad things. But here he is now comforted, and you are in anguish. Besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, that those who want to pass from here to you are not able, and that no one may cross over from there to us." He said, "I ask you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, so they won't also come into this place of torment." But Abraham said to him, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if one rises from the dead." To understand this parable, we need to understand the context by reading Luke 16:13-15. "No servant can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. You aren't able to serve God and mammon," riches. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they scoffed at him. He said to them, "You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. For that which is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God." As we can see from this, the parable was meant to point out the hypocrisy of unrepentant Pharisees who were lovers of money and haughty. So the rich man symbolized the unrepentant sinners in higher society who generally rejected Jesus Christ, while Lazarus symbolized hopeless, lowly people, many of whom repented and accepted him as their Messiah. The fact that Lazarus was with Abraham after death means he was considered righteous and had the hope of resurrection, while the rich man who was struggling in Hades, Sheol, or place of dead, was condemned to suffering in flame of fire, meaning eternal destruction with no hope of resurrection. This is evident in the parable when the rich man asked Abraham to raise Lazarus from the dead and send him to his 5 live brothers so that he can save them from being condemned to the same fate he was in. This is also evident when Abraham said, "Between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, that those who want to pass from here to you are not able, and that no one may cross over from there to us." The great gulf that cannot be crossed over exists between the ones written in the book of life and the ones that are not, just as described in Psalm 69:28. "Let them be blotted out of the book of life and not be written with the righteous." And also in Revelation 20:14-15, "Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was cast into the lake of fire." Here, it clearly equates the lake of fire to the second death, which means eternal destruction with no hope of resurrection, and this is where the rich man ended up in the parable. Finally, the parable ends with Abraham rejecting his plea by saying, "Unless his brothers repent and listen to Moses and the prophets first, they would not repent even if someone rises from the dead." This is exactly what happened even when Jesus rose from the dead. The unrepentant, unbelieving Jews continued on with persecution of his followers. Nevertheless, believers of afterlife claim that this parable proves that Abraham is in heaven, and Lazarus was taken up to heaven to be with Abraham, and that the rich man went to hell to undergo torment in flame of fire. However, first of all, the parable does not mention anything about Abraham being in heaven. It only mentions Hades, Sheol or place of dead, and the rich man recognized that Lazarus was dead, in Hades just like him, but he knew that Lazarus was in a different place where he can be resurrected from, which is why he asked Abraham to raise him and send him to his brothers. And second, remember what Jesus said in John 3:13. No one has ascended into heaven, but he who descended out of heaven, the Son of Man who is in heaven. And in Acts 2:34-35, it says, For David didn't ascend into the heavens, but he says himself, The Lord, Yahweh, said to my Lord, Sit by my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet, which is consistent with what Jesus said. So no one other than Jesus Christ went to heaven, including all the biblical righteous people, such as Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David, Elijah, Isaiah, Daniel, etc. Therefore, Abraham clearly did not go to heaven, and neither did Lazarus in the parable. Also, the rich man did not go to hell where he was supposedly undergoing torment, since the dead don't know anything, neither do they have any more a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Also, their love, their hatred, and their envy has perished long ago. Neither do they any longer have a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 9:5-6. This clearly indicates that the dead don't know anything, and hence cannot feel anything, and yet the rich man was feeling hot and tormented, and also they have no part in anything that is done under the sun. And yet the rich man in Hades, Sheol, was pleading with Abraham to send Lazarus to his 5 live brothers for them to repent, i.e., a dead man was trying to save lives of living persons, which shows that the story in this parable is all metaphorical and not literal. This is unmistakable since the soul who sins shall die, Ezekiel 18:20, ESV, and hence dead souls cannot see, hear, feel, or communicate. And yet the rich man was portrayed as being capable of all of these functions. Therefore, this parable does not prove life after death in heaven or hell in the form of soul.